Welcome to this week's episode of the O Ship Show. I'm your host, Freddie Laker. Today, we're diving into the art and impact of storytelling with Sean Gannet, a visionary in the live production industry. As the founder and CEO of SFG Productions, Sean blends creativity and technical mastery to craft unforgettable events. From collaborating with TED to working with global giants like Software AG and Bayer, Sean has transformed how stories are told and remembered. But how can storytelling elevate your message and inspire action? Well, tune in today and we'll explore the secrets behind making your story unforgettable on this week's episode of Oh Ship. And here we go. Oh Ship. Sean, welcome to Oh Ship. How are you?
I'm great, Freddie. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. I've been looking forward to chatting with you. A lot of times when I have people on a ship, they're people I've known for a long time or people I've been connected to in some way professionally. You're someone that I've just got introduced to recently. You've got a really cool story that I'm looking forward to sharing with our guests. And frequently for the audience who tunes into O Ship every week, they know I love to save the O Ship story for the end of the episode. But I heard through the grapevine you have a hell of a good O Ship story. In my eyes, I think might help set the tone for this whole episode. So for those of you who haven't tuned into O Ship before, I love to ask people what kind of O Ship moment from their history. And the point is, when you're talking to some of the great people that we have on the show, it's easy to look at successful people and assume their path to success was a breeze and question, why haven't I pulled off some of these things? And I think we like to remind people that it's never quite the easy road that it appears. So, Sean, I would love to hear about your journey and where through your career where you've had one hell of an O Ship moment.
Yeah, thanks, Freddie. Yeah, quite literally an O Ship moment. It's a classic dog catches bus kind of story. So I was a filmmaker working in Hollywood and didn't love it. Also, while I was writing a screenplay, started working on AV solutions and dabbling in live events and film festivals. And I got a call for this opportunity to come and interview for the TED conferences. And I had actually not really heard of TED Talks or TED conferences at the time. It was like 15 years ago when they were just on the cusp of breaking in, right? And I went in for this interview and they said, hey, we're really looking for somebody who has like a cinema background and also understands AV. And I was like, oh my God, like lighting up. I had answers for every question. I felt great. And then they said, okay, this sounds great. What we want to do is we want to take a TED conference and we want to put it on a boat. And that boat is going to be in the middle of the Galapagos. And the conference...
Very on brand, by the way. I appreciate that.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, ship, TED on a boat in the middle of the ocean. You're 600 miles from land and the closest AV warehouse. They brought me in to line produce and tech produce. And the first thing they did was they handed me a stack of DVDs. And they said, here's our last TED conference. Watch it and figure out how we do TED conferences. So I was like, great. Okay. So now I'm watching like hours of a live event on a DVD and learning just all about the TED aesthetic. What do they value? What's important to them? And then spending the next 3 months just in boot camp, right? Like I am talking to AV vendors, designers, trying to figure out how the heck are we going to pack 2 tons worth of gear into basically carry on and checked baggage because we couldn't spend 30 days in customs and pay those kind of bribes to get through to the Galapagos and then install it in what was basically a tin can with a 7-foot ceiling. Anyway, we get down there, everything fits onto Zodiacs, we get it into the boat, and we've got this really cool stage design in a suitcase where we're like stretch fabrics and magnets, and we've got a screen, and we end up doing the whole TED aesthetic down there. And it ended up being just this amazing success where we filmed 9 sessions, a ton of the talks like got huge views. And like by the end of it, there was like this really special vibe. It was like a TED conference for 100 people. And they had scientists and philanthropists and activists on board. And at the end, we were all part of this debrief, this kind of collective conversation about what do we do next? Everybody was so inspired that spontaneously, this was not part of the agenda, but spontaneously, they ended up raising different activists and different missions to help protect the oceans, end up raising $15 million on the spot in commitments to help these different initiatives.
That's wild.
And that was truly like an aha moment for me.
Was that like from the 100 audience members?
Exactly. Just from the 100 audience members. Some of them were philanthropists who had big ocean missions, ocean protection missions. And this was all in service of Sylvia Earle, who's like, her name is the queen of deep. She was the TED Prize winner, and her wish as a TED Prize winner was to have a conference that would create awareness about the plight of the oceans and to help create these hope spots, these protected zones in the ocean. And once people started hearing the science, the stories, the ways that activism could change and save the oceans, people were just lit up. And that was the pebble in the pond for me. That was the moment that started the ripple effect of, wait, events are not just about putting on a show, and they're bigger than what even filmmaking could do, which was my background. This was a way that we could actually move people to action, actually create impact, and, sounds cheesy, but change the world. It was incredible.
I have this vision of you trying to cram different lighting gear into every possible bag, pocket, backpack, suitcase you possibly can. You're probably lucky if you got 2 t-shirts and a pair of underwear in there along with everything else you had.
As long as you have your swim trunks, you're good to go.
I think it's funny that when you said, hey, I'd never even heard of TED 15 years ago, I don't think everyone had heard of them either yet. I think it's pretty funny that an event like that has so much prestige to it and is such a unique aesthetic that back then their briefing process was, watch these DVDs, it's going to be great. So
exactly.
But obviously it is a really notable event, and it does have such a powerful reputation, and God knows I've watched my fair share of them. How did that end up impacting you and the way that you've effectively approached production now?
Oh, yeah. I talked about it a little bit, but as a filmmaker, it was really a personal, stories were very much about personal journey and helping folks empathize with my perspective or my character's perspective. But when I could see what happened on a stage there and how that moved people to action, that really just opened my eyes. From a very technical and a very aesthetics and approach point of view, TED was just best in breed. They really did think about how to create moments on stage that feel cinematic, and how you use camera and you use camera coverage and the way you stage productions to create a conversation with the audience. Jason Wishnow, who basically developed the TED aesthetic, like he and I would sit down and talk about, okay, what is the purpose of every camera shot? Why are we covering it this way? And then when I left TED and started doing other events hadn't even thought at all about this. Creating an entire language where you're creating intimacy between who's on stage and who's in the audience and not getting in the way of that. And then also creating an aesthetic that your people at home feel like they're really dialed in and connected. That was really the power of the TED language for live and broadcast.
There's a technical aspect to some of the things you're talking about, but I think there's also, just an aspect that's just about great storytelling, right? And making lasting impressions on people. Do you think, after all the folks you've been exposed to out there now, what do you think the secret sauce is to telling a story that leaves a lasting impression?
Yeah. I think you're right, because we can do all sorts of technical things that look cool. We can have the sparks, we can have the pyro, we can have the fun effects, the big LED. But what really makes something memorable, what really leaves a lasting impression, is when you're able to evoke emotion from your audience. And then the audience is able to connect that emotion to a message, right? A message or an idea or an outcome of your story. Then they just never forget it, right? It's the combination of those two things. And it's really hard to do that, right? There's so many things that you need to be thinking about in order to create honest emotion in your audience. You have to create a safe space for your audience. Does your audience feel like they can emote without being ridiculed? If I cry during this keynote, is my colleague going to laugh at me? Have you created an environment where people feel safe to feel their emotions, right? And then as somebody on stage, you have to also be totally vulnerable, right? You have to be willing to be humble. You have to be willing to show your challenges, the obstacles, the sort of losses that you've had, how you've learned from them, so that the audience can put themselves in your shoes or put themselves in the hero's shoes, the people that you're talking about, and they can feel like they went through that journey. There's no emotional high if you don't have those emotional lows. Thinking about It's not all roses, it's not all sunny all the time, right? How can you make it real for your audience through that relatability?
It's funny because I can't stop myself from cracking jokes. My first inclination is I've tried to keep my crying in my keynotes to a minimum. But while I'm poking fun, I think your point is real and it's poignant that some of the most powerful moments probably ever on stage where someone allowed themselves to actually be that open and that vulnerable.
Yeah, I usually save my crying for when I'm in backstage afterwards.
Yeah, exactly. At the Galapagos.
But laughter too is so important,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
if you can keep people entertained and laughing, that's a reason to tune in. That's a reason to lean in. You can be surprising in how you roll out your message through laughter.
I'm sure you've seen a lot of people speak and present and tell their story over the years. If you had to give someone some advice on how to improve their storytelling abilities, but specifically, let's call it in a business context, what advice would you have for folks?
Yeah. Okay. So if anyone listening is preparing a business presentation or a business story, please, for the love of the Yankees, please just don't start preparing your talk or your presentation by opening up PowerPoint. I feel like that's like the biggest mistake people make is they start building slides, they start throwing like data and graphs and all these different things at their presentation, and they don't step back to look at the big picture. I start by asking yourself some just basic questions so you can organize and wrangle your information. And I think the first big question you want to ask yourself is, what is your one big idea? What is the one thing, your one argument, your one proposal that you want to convey to your audience? And then think about, who is your audience? Okay. What do they come in thinking? Where is their perspective before they hear your talk, they hear your speech, they hear your story? And then the last question is, where do you want them to be at the end? Like when they walk away. And then you have an arc, right? You have an arc of where they are, where they're going to start, and where you want them to finish. And if you can start your presentations in the seat of the audience, in the seat of your attendees, then you're going to be able to carry them. You'll be able to hold their hand every step of the way.
Love that. That's great advice. You've got your own company, SFG Productions. I was poking around your LinkedIn earlier and I saw your title is Chief Story Technician. Did I get it right?
Yeah, that's right.
And I'm going to be honest in saying I normally love teasing people about hokey titles, but I actually think this is a great one. So I had to bring it up. If it was really bad, I'd be too embarrassed to bring it up, but I think this is cool. So tell me about the concept of a story technician.
Yeah, thanks. I'm glad you like it because we basically coined the phrase this year. We want to come up with a title that would encapsulate really what we do. So what we say is that story technicians are folks that have incredible creative knowledge and abilities, but it's grounded in, and they also have the understanding of technical expertise, like how to execute, right? So even though we're great creatives and we understand how to tell stories, how to build programs and agendas, how to speaker coach, how to do graphic design, and how to scenic design and do all those things, it's always grounded in this ability to execute technically, right? We're not dreaming too big for our britches or your budget, right? It's that perfect balance between creative and technical, which is sort of a fun way of saying that we're creative technical producers, and story technicians is a nice hook. So I'm glad you like it.
So just riffing on that, to your point, we were talking about the fireworks and the explosions earlier and so on. And I know it was said with a smile, but how do you make sure that the kind of technical aspects of a production don't end up overshadowing the story, which is something I've definitely seen happen in different aspects and parts of my career?
Yeah. I think a lot of what we try to do is make technology disappear. That's the goal for us, is that we want to eliminate any barriers between what's happening on stage and what's happening in the audience or at home or in your office watching online. One of the things that we think about when we're doing a live event is we really want there to be no bad seat in the house. We make renders from like the back corner and we say, okay, am I going to feel impacted in this view really far away, just as I would if I was in the front row? And if you think of technology as a way of reinforcing a message rather than being its own story, then that's a good philosophy to live by. And that's what we think about. And I think the other thing that we do is we just try to right size our solutions. We're not trying to blow the budget or do something that's going to look good on our portfolio. It's more about, let's make sure the technology aligns what your actual goals of the show are. Mm-hmm. People, they remember a wow factor and a wow moment if it's full of spectacle. But if that's not tied to some very clear message or some clear goal, then you're not going to see ROI, you're not going to see return on that investment in the spectacle.
You shared some advice earlier. I think when you're talking about just how a presenter or a speaker, maybe some of the people listening on to this audio episode right now, I think this is one side of, okay, you don't let the technical side overshadow it. I think there's another part that you described about being open and being vulnerable and finding this way to engage your audience. I think the other bit of great advice you gave was don't lead with a deck and go out there and maybe take this moment to connect with your audience. What's some of the most effective techniques you've seen people use to connect with an audience just as a speaker?
There are so many. There are so many. So in terms of connecting with your audience, I think the first thing you want to do is remember that you want to be relatable when you walk out on that stage, right? I think that what happens so often is that you walk out on stage and you have an agenda. You know that you need to get someplace, you need to convey this message, and you forget that not everybody's there with you. Like, not everybody's running alongside you at the same speed. So you got to be relatable. You got to understand how to weigh in, right? What's your way in to connect with the audience? What's your way in to make sure that the audience is engaged and listening and feels like they see themselves in your story? First, thinking about, okay, where's my audience at and how can I make them laugh, tell a story about myself, do something that they understand, give them an example or a story of a customer story that they understand or a challenge they understand to grip them and make sure that they're moving along with you. I think the other thing is don't get hung up by your data, right? And don't get hung up by trying to wow people with charts and like throwing a bunch of information at folks. Make sure you also have a through line, a narrative arc, right? An arc in which you're talking about challenges and how you overcome them, right? If you have this sort of cycle of what is the goal, what is the desire, what is the challenge that you face to achieve that desire, and then how did you overcome it? That's like a beautiful engine. It's a storytelling engine that really keeps people engaged and listening. It triggers our survival instincts. Oh, this is a story I need to remember because he's helping me solve a problem so I don't fall into that trap next time.
It's funny. I'm writing a book right now that I'm getting on the tail end of completing. And I used to do a ton of public speaking, and I'm about to get back out there in the circuit, I suspect. And so this is particularly interesting to me just on a personal level, let alone I think how our audience will enjoy it. It's fun to, if you're thinking about people that are maybe interested in doing public speaking or presentations, I'd also say try and enjoy it. If you can actually get some fun and enjoyment out of it, it makes it a lot easier and it will help you find a reason to find joy and fun in it. Because if it's just a purely anxiety inducing event for you, then that you're never going to be great at it,
Totally agree. One of the things that I often say to people when they're trying, like this is when they're developing a keynote to start. One of the things I often say is, okay, first, what are you passionate about? What are you passionate about? And then second, what is the perspective that you have that nobody else has? What is the value you're going to bring to this presentation that nobody else could talk about? So that it gives you a point of view. It makes you the authority, right? And then I think that also creates delight in the speaker, right? Because then they get to share something. They get to share something of themselves. They get to share something they're proud of and they're passionate about with their audience. And that can be hard when it's like a dry presentation or something like that. But pretty much guaranteed, like you're giving that presentation for a reason, right? Yeah. You've been selected for a reason. You're the expert for one reason or another. So find your POV and give them that insight.
Yeah. And changing gears, going back now to the technical side of it, again, also identifying with you. In another life, a very long time ago, I was a DJ in Miami Beach. And I can appreciate when technical productions went wrong. Sometimes it would be a tech gear. In my case, back in the early 90s, it was probably because I drank too much and lifted the needle off the record, but that's a whole other conversation. But how do you deal with technical production issues? You want to talk about anxiety when you got 100, 200, 500, 1,000 people in the room and the tech goes wrong and the audio comes to a standstill or something. It's just panic inducing. Yeah. How have you dealt with those or any of those kind of moments that you could openly talk about with us today?
Yeah, totally. It's like there's an oh shit moment like every,
Yeah. And there's O ships in private, and then there's O ships in a conference center with
yeah,
1,000,000 people and your clients screaming at you the whole time.
totally. Look, there are philosophies around preparing for those things. We always try to analyze likely points of failure, create redundancy, and we try to do that according to what's the most important thing about your show. If it's a broadcast, you have the redundancy on the bandwidth, so your stream is going out. If it's a demonstration and this live demo is super important, do you have the demonstration? Is the computer working? Do you have a backup video just in case? You see that happen all the time in tech demos. I think the thing that our stage managers do really well is that they're always speaking to the hosts and the speakers about what would happen in case of an emergency. Like in the unlikely event of a water landing, just so you know, I'm going to walk out on stage. I'm going to whisper in your ear and I'm going to tell you how much time we need to buy or tell you to roll that funny video we have in our back pocket. And I think like for people on stage, like the advice is just be honest, just roll with it. If you're backstage, communicate to the people on stage so they can be honest and they can roll with it. I do have a really terrible, huge, just tech fail story. Yeah. Okay.
I love those, Sean.
Oh,
Give
yeah.
it to me.
Yeah.
I crave your oh shit moment, Sean.
Yeah. We were doing this small show. It was in Sao Paulo. And it was in...
Do you get to go to some cool places on a quick side note?
Yeah. So. Look, this ended up being like this. Of course, they always end up being incredible stories sometimes. So this one, we were in Sao Paulo. We're in a small venue. It's a really intimate gathering. And we get through one presentation and the power goes out. Okay, fine. Power goes out. We knew the power wasn't great to begin with, but we had a generator outside. We figured we just got to reset something. Unfortunately, somebody went to the power and flipped a switch and sent a current through that power and fried half of our equipment.
So it's not coming back online.
It is not coming back online. And this event is happening during rush hour in Sao Paulo. What are there, 20 million people in Sao Paulo? Like, there's a truck. Imagine the image of a graphic of a truck 10 miles away inching towards our venue with a new TriCaster or a new recording device. Kudos to the hosts, kudos to the speakers, kudos to the audience. Because while we're waiting for this truck to arrive with new equipment, there was just this, you talk about an unconference, there was just this beautiful, self-led, a spontaneous entertainment that just happened. It was like a talent show of those who were in the crowd. Like people would come up on stage and they would recite poetry. That's awesome. Somebody like got up and led everybody in a sing-along that everybody knew. It was like a humorous sing-along that I didn't know what the heck they were talking about. It was in Portuguese. I had no idea what it was about. There was a marriage proposal on stage during this time.
That's amazing. You can't make that stuff up. It
was incredible. It was like the vibes of the audience were so awesome, so intense in the best way. Eventually, the new equipment got there. We were able to reestablish power, plug everything in. We get through one more talk. Power goes out again. You've got to be kidding me, right? Somebody like goes to turn on the power. I like threw myself in front of
you're like, no!
Don't touch it. I was like, I don't know what happened last time, but we were unplugging everything before this comes back online. Eventually got it back up and running. The event was supposed to end at 8 o'clock. It didn't end until something like midnight. It was a crazy delay. Nobody left. The entire audience stayed, supported. And at the end, we're in Brazil, so we all went to a club. We danced till 4 a.m. It was incredible.
That's amazing. I love that. I was going to ask you another question, but I don't think I can top that story. Sean, you're a really interesting guy. I really enjoyed this chat. If other people who are watching the show or listening want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, sure. So you can go to the website. We've got a contact link there, contact page. That's sfgproductions.com. Easy to remember because it stands for so effing good. And
nice.
And
I was going to ask. I was like, what is it, Francis? No. Okay, that's good. I'll take that. That's good.
Yeah. You can find us online, and of course, like I'm on LinkedIn as my name or Story Technician. So feel free to connect with me or message me. I'd love to hear from you all.
That's great, Sean. Thank you for being so gracious with your time. I really appreciate it. And I just wanted to give a quick special thank you to those of you who tune in every week, whether you're listening on any of our podcasts or you are watching us on YouTube or Facebook or LinkedIn. Thank you. I cannot thank you enough for all the support you've shown the show. over the years. We're actually approaching 12,000 YouTube followers now, and God knows what we're up to on the podcast, but I really appreciate you guys being here every week. Go to oshipshow.com if you want to see other ways you can consume this content, and it's an easy way to tell your friends. Best thing you can do to support us is subscribe, like, comment, forward, share, tell your friends. All of that really helps us. Thank you again. I can't state how much I appreciate everyone that is here every week with us. So, Sean, thanks again, mate. You were a real pleasure. Some wonderful O-Ship stories in there. You've got a really fun career, and it sounds like you're making an impact at the same time. So I hope to meet you in person one day, and thanks again for coming to O-Ship.
Thank you, Freddie. It's been a pleasure.
See you, everyone. See you next week.